You're listening to
They're gonna call it a hard foul. They're gonna call it a hard foul.
We got Postgame Live coming up for you. It's presented by the New England Ford Dealers. A disappointing night for the Boston Celtics. This will not be a fun flight back to Boston. Quick road trip, just one game north of the border. And the Celtics lose to the Raptors. They've beaten Toronto 10 times in a row. That streak ends tonight. 110-97 your final.
Mike, there's a fly in the ointment with the Celtics. Something is not right. They're 7-7 over the last 14, as you just told me a minute ago. They're 12-10.
Yeah, Jim, it's Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. They just hate each other. They don't like each other. They haven't liked each other since the start. I've been watching them for years, and they just have always hated each other, and it's finally coming out. Last year's championship isn't real.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Bunch of criminals, if you ask me.
Well, I'm glad Tony Maz waited in there with. And as you told me, I guess Jimmy Stewart has got some controversy going on with the problems in the Celtics locker room.
Oh, maybe it was Michael Falga. I don't know. One of them. You know how
one of them?
Yeah. You know how they be.
Yeah. So without any real evidence to that, I think we got to talk about what we see and what's going on and what's wrong with this team. Is this something we should panic about? Should drastic changes be made, or is this the doldrums of the NBA season? Mike, I think the first thing we need to look at is the players. That's always the first thing you need to look at is the players in the league.
And, yeah, I agree. Can I answer your question you just asked too? I think my prediction at the end of this pod is the answer to that question is going to be all three. I think that's the direction we're going to end up going, but let's see where we go. And let's talk
drastic changes. You think drastic changes are needed?
I think maybe it won't be drastic changes, but I have a feeling we're going to talk about some changes. So there you go for correcting me. But yeah, take it, Jim. Start with some players.
Well, you go first. What player to you has been like the most either disappointment or like you expect more or problematic? Whatever adjective you want to use here. Over the course of the season and during this run that you think needs to get this thing, up to snuff.
Yeah, I think that Holiday and Derek White haven't been as good as they were last year. Obviously, Holiday stands out more because his shooting has been drastically worse, especially from the corner three, than it was last year. He was such a reliable guy from there. Derek White's still blocking shots. I'm sure it shows up in the statistics, but I do feel like they're getting beat off the dribble more too, especially by quicker guards. And offensively, they're just not as consistent as they were last year, whether it's hitting threes or finishing at the hoop. White's really in a bad way right now. I don't know what's going on with him. He only played 21 minutes against Toronto. They were playing Peyton Pritchard more. I don't know if long-term that's a good decision. They need to get Derek White right. He was a huge part. This is a guy that scored 38 points in the playoff game last year against Miami. Yeah, right. So I know you're going to go in a different direction because we talked before the pod, but I want to leave that to you because I wasn't even thinking of the player you're going to talk about. But I just think throughout the entire season, I'm not disappointed, but I just think they have to be better. I think they have to be a lot better. White's just not consistent right now, and he at times last year was their second best player on the team. That's how good he was playing at times. And so they definitely need him to be their third best player all around with what he brings defensively and offensively. And maybe Holiday's just, getting older, but his shot has just been pretty bad all season.
Yeah, and I would say I think Holiday probably over the last few has been better, one of their better players, but on the whole, his shooting from the corner in particular has been bad. He's still able to just flex on even bigger guys and taking them to the post and score when the Celtics needed that. Defensively, you still see what
big
he's
plays.
capable. Yeah, big plays and what he's capable of bringing. The Derek White stuff, he's gone through slumps before. We've seen it. This is obviously kind of exaggerated a little bit more than what we're used to. And the thing about this one, it's kind of like coming off the heels of another one where it felt like had gotten out of it and has quickly fallen back into another slump. We've talked a little bit back and forth, and we certainly mentioned this in the preseason pod. The amount of basketball these guys have played has
Hmm.
been a lot, and particularly these two guys that you brought up. They, coming off an Olympics where they were both rotation players. Holiday was a starter, and you just wonder if you look over the course of the last 3 seasons, the amount of minutes, the amount of games these guys have played, and then not getting a summer off, coming off a championship. Are we seeing kind of the effects of that right now? And is playing Derek White 21 minutes every once in a while actually kind of smart to kind of take the toll off this guy? Do we got to find ways to do that with Holiday? I know they have.
They
I'm
certainly
not
have with
sure.
Holiday.
I'm not sure if he was really hurt when they had him miss games earlier in the
Yeah.
season. And I just wonder if we need to see more of that. If these guys are kind of hitting the proverbial wall right now. I mean, it's kind of the
It's tough
doldrums
though
of the
because
season.
Joe's in a tough spot because the starters have played so bad together. He's got to
Yes.
get playing well. So to sit guys, it's going to just prolong that process. So it's no, this is he's going to figure that out. That's his job because you bring up some good points here.
Yeah, and they got to figure it out. The sooner the better. But obviously, at the same time, you want to figure it out in April and in March than more
Hmm.
than January
Right.
and February.
Yeah.
So there's time to get this right, and there's probably a balance of getting these guys the proper rest they need. Um, I think this team needs an all-star break. I think guys like Holiday and White need an all-star break. I think it's not a shock that Porzingis is one of their better players, and he really didn't play a minute at all for the first part of the season. And, he's got some healthy legs and running around and playing well out there, where some of these, especially these older veterans like Holiday, White, and
Yeah.
we didn't loop Horford in this, but Horford as well is not shot the ball anywhere near what we've expected him to do over the past few seasons.
Yeah. And before we get to your guy, just to bring up KP, I do think he's played well, but I also think defensively with him on the court, there's been some real issues, especially getting out on 3-point shooters. And I do think he's been a big part of the problem with the 3-point shooting we've seen against the Celtics recently. Um, he doesn't get out on them like he did last year. He doesn't. I don't think I've seen him block. I don't remember the last time I've seen him block a 3-point shot, where that was kind of a regular thing last season. He was like, he was doing things that were like, he wasn't in the defensive player of the league category, but he was doing defensive player of the league type things last year when he was healthy in the regular season. And obviously, he's not the same guy coming off
Yeah.
this injury, but they're giving up a lot of 3-point shots with him on the floor. Now
I
they're taking
think
away the
that
paint,
I think that
so
has
it's like,
more I think that has more to do with the other four sometimes than him. And we can get into this when we talk
you
about the
know,
defense. If your ball pressure is just poor, if you're not defending the next entry pass, you're making it impossible for you, big man, to
that's
defend
a good point
the
too. Yeah,
3-point line. And they're not doing any of that. And they certainly didn't do it against Toronto. I mean, we were seeing two guys go to the ball on a screen and just
yeah,
let Bruce Brown roll uncontested for a layup. Like you saw things like that all game long, and they did it without a point guard. Toronto, it just took moving the ball a little bit, but the Celtics didn't insert any pressure. They weren't defending the next pass. They just
it's a lifeless team against Toronto.
yeah, and I think you can only expect so much out of your 7'2" guy. He can defend the paint when things are like that, but they expect him to also get out and shooters. When your other four aren't on a rope. It's not going to work. Just yeah, I don't care. You point to the player in the league, Wembanyama, anyone. It's not going to work. So
Yeah,
I, I I I think he's mostly done his job defensively. What you expect. Their issue was points in the paint. I think the other guys have been incredibly disappointing on that
yeah,
end. And that kind of gets me to the next guy. Because at times he's been their best defender, and he's talked about wanting to be all NBA, Jaylen Brown. but I think there's also been times where he's been really inconsistent, even on that end.
I think he's a
This year.
borderline all-star player this year. I don't think he's a shoo-in in my mind.
No, and he has not been as good as last year. He's another guy whose shooting has suffered. I think one area there's been a couple areas where he's improved. I think his post-up game has improved. I think his passing has improved. I don't think he posts up enough. It still drives me crazy that when Tatum's out of the game, that they're running the offense,
Yeah, it's
initiating through him. That doesn't
yeah,
seem to make much sense to me right now with the way things are going.
exactly.
Um, and I don't know, like he definitely came into the season with a shoulder thing. And his finishing in the paint suffered earlier in the year as well as with shooting the three. His finishing in the paint has gotten a bit better, but he goes through these stretches, and he's in one right now where he isn't giving them nearly enough offense. And we're going to talk, and everything's tied together, obviously, but we're going to talk about rotations later. How many times when Tatum's gone to the bench to start the fourth, are we looking like 3, 4, 5 minutes where the Celtics have scored 0 to 4 points? Like it feels like every loss that's been the case to start the fourth. And I don't know how you win games. And I have when that happens to you over and over again, and it's hard not to look directly at Jaylen Brown as the source of one of the main reasons for that issue. He's out there playing with a lot of good offensive players when Tatum's out of the game.
Timmy, I agree.
And nothing's happening, and there's no separation, there's no ball movement, there's nothing going on. He needs to be better. I don't like to throw the contract stuff out there, but he's a supermax player. He's an all-star. He's talked about wanting to be all defense. He's an NBA Finals MVP. He's an Eastern Conference Finals MVP. I mean, those are the accolades, all well deserved. He earned, but it needs to be better for him. And maybe there's still an ailment going on there. Maybe there's still an injury. Maybe they're not completely healthy. But if you're on the floor, it doesn't matter. You get graded for if you're being thrown out there, you're going to be graded for being out there. I can't diagnose an injury I don't know about. So it has not been good enough from him. And I would even say over the course of the last week or so, I don't think it's been as pronounced as Brown over the course of the season, but the other superstar, Jason Tatum, especially in your losses, your most two recent losses,
just
the
one thing about Brown.
Raptors, hasn't been great either. Go ahead, Mike.
Jaylen Brown's field goal percentage is the lowest of his career. It's matching his rookie year field goal percentage. His three-point field goal percentage is the worst of his career. He's having the worst three-point shooting of his career. So to me, it's like the first season we've seen him regress. He's always been a guy who's,
really makes you think that something's going on physically. If it's a shooting numbers like that, especially the field goal percentage, because that's around the rim stuff, it really makes you wonder if something physically isn't right.
Yeah, something's off, and his turnovers are up as well.
Yeah.
He's right there with the highest turnovers per game in his career. He's right at almost 3 turnovers per game. So yeah, he has not been good as far as what we expect from Jaylen Brown. And I don't know. It's really hard for me to see them going deep without him playing much better.
Yeah, no, they need him to be better. They can't have this extreme drop off, and it's been pronounced mostly in their losses. When Tatum goes to the bench and your team's being led by your other all-star, Finals MVP, you can't have this. It's been extreme, especially in those losses. And you saw it again the other night against Toronto, where they went the first 4.5 minutes scoring 2 points. Like when he's surrounded with Porzingis, Pritchard, White, and Holiday, like how does that happen? That makes it absolutely makes no sense. With the amount of talent on the floor, and it felt like the Celtics couldn't get an open shot because they weren't moving the ball.
They weren't moving the ball. I mean,
There
it's
was
a
no penetration, anything like that.
and I know you want to get to Tatum, but I think this is we got to talk about Missoula a little bit during this stretch here because there are no adjustments as far as the way they play offensively. It's 5 out all the time. They're not posting up Tatum and Brown. They're not doing different things. And the offense, the fourth
I,
quarter offense is just so stagnant that
he's
like
putting guys in the dunker spot, and yeah, maybe there could be more done,
it
but
takes forever though, and like
he's trying adjustments. I mean, he's going to a 2-2-1 press, 1-2-2 press. He's going to a zone. He's trying to do something to get a spark, and nothing's happening. Maybe there's other things he can do, but it's not like they're pretty extraordinary changes for a team that doesn't really play that way.
yeah, but when you shoot as poorly as the Celtics are percentage wise from three, you can't just rely on 5 out offense. They have to switch something up. They have to. Whether that getting guys more cuts to the basket or more pick and roll offense, it just feels like a lot of ISO. It feels like a ton of ISO that the Celtics go into, especially in the first and fourth quarters of these games.
Yeah, I agree with the ISO part. It feels a little bit like that. Maybe it feels like that because they're missing so much. But I do think with Porzingis in the game, it hasn't been as much 5 out. I think when Al comes into the game, there's been more 5 out. I thought they tried a little bit of the darker spot with him in the last game more than they typically do. But um, I it's I mean I don't know. Sometimes it feels like they try to post Porzingis too much, and it gets their offense stagnant. Like there's a lot just not working, and maybe it's the shooting, Mike. Maybe it's solely the shooting that's just been so poor for so many guys. Maybe it's you can't get penetration, but the ball does not seem humming right now.
Oh,
So you get a team that can't move the ball. You're not getting any fast break points. You're not able to defend. And those are just to me, they're all signs of a dead ass team.
exactly.
Yeah, like you like I'm kind of speaking to it now. It's just all signs of a dead ass team or a team that's not completely healthy. And why don't you get to like my Tatum stuff was short. It's just over the last couple of losses, he hasn't been as good as he has been the rest of the season. Outside of that, he's been all NBA. We shouldn't spend too much time as him on the problem. But the other guy I know you want to touch on, Mike, and you talk about shooting, guys having the worst shooting season of their career. Sam Hausen.
Yeah, it's been a struggle, and part of me feels bad because I think there is a real there's a back problem. I feel like this is a
Oh,
real
there
thing.
definitely is. Yeah.
Um, and you want to keep going to him because you trust him and he's been there, but I don't think he's defending like he did last year. This is a guy that was covering Luka in the NBA Finals by himself and doing okay. He was a guy you could trust in rotations defensively. I don't think you can right now. And in a big moment, he can't be on the floor. And um, I am at the point when you talk about drastic changes. I'm not going to call it a drastic change. I'm going to call it a drastic opportunity to maybe play. I know that maybe I over like this guy, but I think I would give Drew Peterson minutes. Um, I think every time he's played, he's shown him something. And he's long, he defends, he can shoot. And if Hauser's not healthy, why not let him get healthy? See if you got something in this kid. Like, why not give Hauser an extended time off to really take care of his back? Because this kid looks like he can play in my eyes. I think Drew Peterson's an NBA player, and I think he's ready to play.
Yeah, I'd give it a shot. I would even say Jordan Walsh was playing pretty well the last few games he was in there,
There
especially
was one game in
defensively.
particular he played really well. Yeah,
He gets after with energy and defensively, and like maybe throw
I
him
hear
out
you,
there
Jim,
hoping he make.
but Peterson has shown us like shooting off the dribble, making some
So
really good passes. Like there's things we've seen that I think you got to play the kid. I do. I'm on it. Like I want this guy out there. I want to see what we have.
so we just talked about four guys: Holiday, Hauser, Brown, and White. We're all shooting um, a lot worse than
And
they
you
did
didn't
last
include?
season.
Did you include Horford?
And then Horford as well. Yeah, so we
Yeah.
have five guys who we've seen a precipitous drop in their shooting percentage from three in particular, and their overall field goal percentage. Um, Obviously, those guys shoot to their levels. It fixes a lot of these problems.
Big time.
But but right now it's just been so prolonged, and and I think you're starting to see, as we saw in the Kings game now, where these other guys aren't performing, that teams are showing different defenses towards Jason Tatum and giving
Wouldn't
him a
you?
lot. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it makes things even more difficult, and it definitely hurts your offense on what you want to do, which is move this ball and get as many touches as you possibly can. Um, and Mike, this defense, which I think is the biggest problem. I think, well, it's always a player's number one, but if I'm going to the like what's on the floor problem, even worse than the shooting, how do you give up 75% from the floor in the second half to the Toronto Raptors? Like, how does that, in what world does that happen? Where does anyone ever shoot 75% for a half? Like,
Man.
and they didn't even have they didn't even have quickly. They didn't even have a true point guard up there to break
It's
you
when you're
down.
completely lifeless and there's a real lack of effort and focus. That's when it happens, I guess. I really can't explain it, Jim, with all the talent on this team, even with tired legs. I mean, that is just that is just not caring. That's just not caring on that night. That's the team that didn't show up to play. That's what that was. They came out at halftime and they were like, Toronto sucks. We don't have to try. We're gonna win. And they got their asses kicked. I can't figure it out. There isn't anything schematically other than them not being able to cover people or be in the right spot. They're a mess defensively. And I think part of it is effort at this point. I think there's a lot of schematic things that you'll get into, but I also think part of it is effort and focus and being ready to play. And I don't think they are.
Oh, they're not attention to detail right now, and
No.
there isn't the effort is missing in terms of you see it, and we touched on it earlier. You're missing the ball pressure. That's not schematic.
Yeah.
That's just getting out on guys. You're one pass away defending that first pass hard. You defend that first pass hard. An NBA player is still going to be able to make that pass. But you all of a sudden you set everything in motion from there on out, right? Now the offense really has to work to score. You make that an easy catch in the NBA. That gives that offensive player such an advantage. It gives that offense such an advantage over you. So there's the initial start to the defense. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, those things, like you said, are just effort. Those are effort things that they need to be better at. I think schematically, like their defense works schematically. I don't think that's the issue. I think they're switching and they have guys to do it and they have a rim protector. Yeah, is there a weakness? Sure. If you have a really good point guard, you can make the Celtics pay. But I
Yeah.
don't think there's a team in the league that you can't find a weakness for, maybe with the exception of OKC, right? And even them, there's probably something. I think it's exasperated by the long misses. I think it's exasperated by the careless turnovers. Was it a defensive issue against Sacramento when you're just turning the ball left and right and they scored 24 points of transition? That's not defense. That's all offense, like leading to easy scores. So I think it's all connected that way. But the other night against Toronto, that was all defense. That was all defense, of not being able to contest and not getting that initial, stops. And
Yeah.
I think those things can be fixed, but it's just not consistent on any level from game to game,
Mhm.
for what you need. So,
And it's not consistent in big moments. So they'll have, I feel like the second quarter and usually the start of the third quarter is always awful, but usually like 2 or 3 minutes into the third quarter, they have a really good run defensively and their offense picks up on it. But to start games and to finish games, like the fourth quarter isn't like 3 bad minutes. It's an
yeah,
entire quarter of just high school basketball bullshit. It's like hard to watch with how bad and how dumb they play. Um, so it comes in like critical moments. Like you start a game well, you're out and running, right? They can't start games well, and their defense doesn't show up to start games because they're not ready to play. And then the fourth quarter happens, and they can't end games well. They don't come out, they can't shoot, they go 5 minutes without scoring. And on top of it, they can't make any friggin' stops. And they're missing free throws all the time in the biggest
Yeah,
moments of games.
especially in the last game.
This
It
is
was
like
pronounced.
this is like Detroit Pistons fourth quarter basketball the last 3 seasons.
Except for
It's
this
like
season.
really bad. Not this season because
Yeah,
they're playing
not
well,
this.
but the last 3 seasons, it's really
And I can't even blame Missoula for going zone. Like in the last game,
you gotta
usually
try something.
would scream and get out of the zone. But I was like, well, just keep playing it because you're not putting the effort when you go man to man. You're not switching well. You're not taking good angles. Your ball pressure sucks. The defending of the first pass is really lousy. And
Can I ask
so,
you a question about the zone though? You put your coaching hat on.
mhm.
Doesn't it make more sense if you're gonna go zone? Maybe not because the NBA with the shooting, but to go with two bigs when you're going zone to shrink the floor as much as you can to have Porzingis and Al out there together. Um,
Yeah, well, I
because
think
I feel like they're too small and they get spread out with their zone. That's how they get beat up.
I think they've done that, but I think in the fourth quarter they want to get when you're down as much firepower with the guards out there, so they're rocking a hard place type of situation against Toronto. Like your players put you in that position, and then you leave yourself open to getting beat on the rebounds because it's harder to box out and rebound in the zone. So
Yeah, big times. Yeah.
so like it's creating all sorts of problems. Um,
And
and
a
maybe
zone
some.
defense, like it tends to make you um they don't have intensity to begin with, but it does drop whatever intensity you have sometimes because you're playing an area, you're not always playing a man. So I think it's easy to lose focus in the zone. Um, to be as
But
locked.
they're losing focus in man anyway. So like
Yeah, so it's
sometimes it's just simpler to cover an area when you see stuff that bad.
yeah.
Um, the other issue, and we've touched on it, and this is where maybe we can start talking about
Jesus.
potential fixes. I think one simple thing I would do is I would change my rotations a little bit in terms
Yep.
of I would have Brown close quarters and I'd have Tatum start. So, especially in the second half, I would have Tatum start the fourth quarter, and maybe go to the bench with, you know, 8 minutes, 7 minutes in the third, and let
And then have it come back in for like the last 4 minutes of the fourth kind of thing.
yeah, maybe just hope that it not be in the fourth quarter, the intensity's a little bit down too for the Brown led unit. So the intensity's down from the opposition. It's not quite to start the game, to start the fourth, and that urgency.
Tatum can get
And
going.
maybe you get them going, and it also it keeps Tatum out there. Maybe that cures some of the fourth quarter issues. Like it's been going on so often now, and the one thing I do respect about Joe is he's patient and he lets things kind of work out, and the
Yeah.
long-term goals are more important than the short term. But I don't see this one as really getting you in trouble with your long-term goals as much. If this works, then
And it worked
it
at the beginning
works.
of the
But
year. I don't know what they were doing with fourth quarter rotations at the beginning of the year, but the start games at the beginning of the year was all Jason Tatum. It was a high dose of Tatum. I remember I had a little bit of an issue with this because Jaylen Brown wasn't playing well, but he's not playing well in general. So they they were really efficient with going to Tatum to start games and just attacking with him. So
setting
maybe
the
they can,
tone, yeah.
yeah, set the tone, have high volume scoring from Tatum in every fourth quarter. Um, I mean, I think we would both agree if that's a game plan, it's probably gonna work out because Tatum night to night shows up to play. It's very seldom that he's gonna have a terrible game. It's probably your best course of action right now moving forward.
Yeah, and I don't think it would have made much of a difference against Toronto the way the Celtics were playing. But you look even at
Yeah.
that OKC game, that start of the fourth was just so bad. And you
Well, yeah,
wonder if maybe you get Tatum
all
going
points. But
downhill, trying to get to the line to start the fourth. Maybe that changes things a little bit and at least keeps you competitive. Um, I just think we've just seen so many starts to the fourth quarter that, has kind of sealed the fate for the Celtics in these losses that I'd just like to see that change. Any other
yeah.
changes you'd want to see? I know you mentioned something pre-pod.
Um, well, it's just something I heard somebody else talk about, and they were just pointing to the fact of how well Al Horford played as a starter this year, compared to coming off the bench, where in particular his shooting splits. One point this season when they were 16-3, he was at like 48, 49% from three. It seemed like he was in a really good rhythm. I'm not sure when exactly KP came back, so it's hard to really measure in my mind right now. But the argument was that, KP is the type of player that could produce for you coming off the bench or as a starter, is basically what this reporter was saying. He's gonna play well either way. And maybe you're gonna get the most out of Al if you start him. And of course, you can finish games with KP. KP will play more minutes, but this would be a way to maybe get the most out of Al shooting. He seemed to be, and he played well as a starter in the playoffs last year too. He was consistent in shooting the ball well. So, I think that we tend to overreact as fans, especially myself, when the Celtics play this sport. And I think I have to remind myself that it's January basketball and there's a ton of room for them to go on a 16-3 run again this season. But it's an interesting point that this guy brought up. And if Kristaps Porzingis was okay with it, and it helps the team, why not try? But I know that you think long term, like to win a championship, it's got to be KP in the starting lineup.
Well, I just think this group needs to find a way to play better. The starting five, whether they're finishing the games or not. So I do see like how that could help Al and get him going, and maybe it helps your stats in the short term. But I think this team can survive and win a title with Al not shooting well and not going well if everything else is humming along. And I don't think they can win a
I agree
title
too, but
if this five doesn't figure it out.
I agree too with that, Jam. It's just that Al's such a clutch player in big moments for this team, that if there's some way to get him going, I just long-term success is a guy I trust. If they can figure out to get him back, but there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of problems right now. We've addressed a lot of different things. This might be a tough stretch for a while here. We might be watching some bad basketball for a little bit. They still haven't lost 2 games in a row though, all season. So
yeah, they have.
How about that? They have?
Yeah, they've lost 2 in a row.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. It happened before their road trip.
Well, they lost consecutive games?
I thought they did. Yeah.
I don't think they have. I think I'm right on this one.
Okay. I thought they did. I thought that. Well, I'll say this too. Like
maybe I think I'm right.
There's a long roadway. Maybe the simple thing here too is finding ways to get guys rest and finding a way. Maybe this is, what we're seeing is guys hitting a wall, because there's so much that's not going right. But the other thing that's kind of perking my ears a little bit is, you mentioned the ISO and some of that selfish play. Like, how do we get out of that, and why is that happening too? Is that happening because we're not trusting the shooters because shooting's, been so bad? Are they not trusting like who they are a little bit? Has it been like an identity crisis?
Or are they tired and they don't want to put in the effort to move the ball? Like these are real questions. And Brad Stevens, like maybe there's a little pressure on you. You got to move Springer. You got to move Tillman. You got to bring in some help, some fresh legs to give Joe the firepower to give these guys nights off.
Especially with Hauser kind of not healthy. Yeah, I think maybe you need maybe to get Lonnie Walker in here, there is some urgency because he does give you that offense, immediate offense that you're kind of seeking right now from your bench. My prediction on this is that I do think this kind of inconsistent play is going to go on for a little bit while longer. I do think we've touched on this possibly happening in the preseason pod. So like, I think this is a doldrum. There's something obviously wrong. I wouldn't call it rot like some people are. I wouldn't say this is the end of the road for these guys. But I will say if they can't figure out what ails them, these bad habits creep in and then they're tough to get out. They're
Yeah.
tough to get out. Even if you stop feeling better healthy, like the bad habits kind of, they get contagious. So they do have to figure this out. Maybe this is a post All-Star break problem. Maybe this is a post solution, not a problem. Maybe it's a post trade deadline solution. But right now, they're in the midst of it, and tonight they're really going to be tested against a real physical Orlando Magic basketball team.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's going to be a hungry and angry Orlando Magic team because I think they just got blown out in
They
Orlando.
did. They got spanked by the Bucks. Yeah,
Yeah, and they tend to bounce back. They
they're
do.
young.
Yeah.
It's young. Not as many miles as the Celtics have on them.
And
And
after they
then
play Orlando, it's a back-to-back against an Atlanta team that gave the Celtics problems. And
yeah, I think you're at a point right now where every team is an issue, whether it's the Hawks or anyone else, and certainly the Hawks gave them some problems. Mike, you kind of froze there, so that's why
yeah,
I jumped in.
pros. Yeah. I was just saying, I think they're not going to have KP, Al Horford, Andrew Holiday against Atlanta. But my internet connection's unstable, so let's end the pod, Jim. Everybody have a great weekend. Celebrate the life of Martin Luther King.
That's right. Celebrate the light of Martin Luther King. And I will say, this was just like the Celtics are a train wreck prod. I'll end it with I ultimately think they're going to be fine. Whether they win another
Oh,
championship or not, I don't know, but I think they're going to be fine.
the Celtics is still a train wreck, and Steve Kerr is still up. Have a nice pod, everybody.
Talk to you soon.